So our next speaker is Julia Elizabeth Neal. Julia Elizabeth Neal is an assistant professor of modern and contemporary art at the University of Michigan. And in her research, she's looking at the intersections between the visual, the politics of identity, and transnationalism since the post-war era. She's going to be speaking with us today about Ben Patterson and the Lick piece and shed a new light on a work that we haven't yet discussed here in this symposium. So thank you very much, Julia, for being with us, and let's have a round of applause for her.
Through more than one Baroque gesture of theatricality and collective lascivious misbehavior, the wastefulness and excess of Ben Patterson's Lick piece is situated between the artistically progressive and ignominious involvement of the female body in performance. Simple yet explicit text beckons performers to cover shapely female with whipped cream, lick, ... topping of chopped nuts and cherries optional. The event score is both indeterminate for its open parameters, such as application, intensity, or pace, and linguistically elastic enough to publicly reveal one's idiosyncrasies and comfort with licking a nude female body live. Lick piece is a highly charged performance, not just for sustaining the Western tradition of visualizing the white nude female body, but for ostentatiously focusing on the corporal consumption that likewise implicates its audience in media res. As if to wreak havoc on the lurid and forbidden privacy of one's imagination, Patterson's ellipses, ... after the unpunctuated declarative lick, Riley omits and veils how far the performance could, but never result, sex. This reservation of the artist's conceptual handiwork may appear incongruous since it is suggestively framed by the topic of sex. However, the explicit unfolding of Lick piece engages how Patterson, an autodidact of international post-war art vis-a-vis Fluxus, steadily formed propositions to explore human action and inaction. For today's brief presentation, I will argue that Lick piece reifies the limits of representation and consumption as an enduring problematic in Western art via three shortened acts of recognition, beginning first with the performance's historicity, then engaging its position within discourse on Patterson and the female body, and finally by highlighting a few of the afterlives of the performance and therefore its broader context. Lick's piece purposely hinges on Patterson's challenge to misbehave. So Act 1, historicity. Contrary to its scandal, Lick piece's reputation precedes its multi-year failure. Indeed, it is unabashedly salacious potential was actually unprotected by Fluxus freedom and experimentation. Patterson failed to perform Lick piece for 2 years since extracting it from his first artist book called Methods and Processes, which he self-published while living in Paris in 1962, due in part to its contingency upon women's consent. The figure in Lick piece, however, is neither a static figure nor a model purely for the studying gaze of anatomy. Instead, the figure in the 1960s was a woman whose body was actively altered through contact from multiple vestiges such as arms and tongues. Patterson hoped to debut Lick piece during the same time he debuted his quadrilinear floor game titled Pond, often referred to as Frog Pond at Fest and Fluxstorm in Copenhagen. However, his endeavor was confronted by a major logistical force, a woman in her participation. Artist Arthur Kopka, who expressed great enthusiasm to finally perform Patterson's event score, actually struck out on dependably enlisting a willing participant from his quote unquote little black book. According to Patterson, who in hindsight asserted that Lick piece, quote, had nothing to do with sexism, end quote, he baked on the potential of realizing this event score due to its site and rumors, chiefly that Copenhagen observed an openness for sex and nudity. Unnamed and therefore anonymous today, the only woman to have said yes at that time canceled before the event out of hesitation. Thus, Patterson's presentation of Lick Piece in 64 can be productively understood under a different set of favorable circumstances. And so here I'm just showing you the exterior of 359 Canal Street. In 1964, the opportunity emerged from the availability of a safer space for risk-taking due to its domestic location rather than a church, Nikolai Kirche, at 359 Canal Street, which was a Fluxus hub inside of the Fluxus shop, Flux Hall, living quarters, and the chances for its preservation occurred through photographer Peter Moore. The moment involved greater social buy-in, as most of the audience and participants possessed some relationship with Fluxus or were enthusiasts, but lastly and most importantly, a woman by the name of Letty Eisenhower, who passed away this year, was a known and enlisted young woman, artist and performer enough to have a professional profile as such, and consented. On May 9th, 1964, Letty Eisenhower sat in the nude, drenched by streams of whipped cream that melted across her skin while the hands and tongues of 3 male performers consumed it from the surface of her body. Eisenhower was not a naive young woman, but neither was she invulnerable to the everyday experiences of navigating male-dominated spheres. In the 96 interview, she discussed, for example, the masculinist terrain at Douglas College, where she was a student, but also where Elizabeth Neal, the chair of the department, wished her to be a quote unquote nice little female secretary instead of a student or professional artist. Eisenhower, known by then as a co-participant to experimental performances at the turn of the 50s and the early 60s, such as Alan Caprell's Happenings, performed the role of an objectified female body, embodying in live action and in the flesh the patriarchal objectification of women throughout modernist art histories. Her participation was central to the history of Lick Piece, which was stymied by the interpersonal conditions requisite for licking a nude woman under the pretext of art. Widely circulated in exhibitions and media to represent Lick Piece, this one monochrome photograph prominently centers on Eisenhower. In it, she's the recipient of uneven layers and dribbles of whipped cream that glop in foamy packs along her clavicle, thighs, and drape slowly towards her feet. Performers from Patterson to George Breck and Robert Watts are still in the initial stage of applying the whipped cream, whereas a sneaky and unexpected simultaneous performance of Patterson's floor score instructions in the bottom right hand detail seems to occur beneath his foot. Eisenhower's body in this moment appears less of an enticing delicacy and more of a mess, contrasting quite sharply with this cover image that followed the year after of artist Dolores Erickson on Herb Alpert and Tijuana Brass's Whipped Cream and Other Delights LP. Erickson's whipped cream, heavily applied as if she wore a dress accompanied by a fascinator, undoubtedly carries sexual overtones by the gesture of her hand, rose, and direct eye contact. However, I want to draw attention to the interpretive risks of this photograph's overwhelming role in historicizing the performance. First, Patterson never possessed the creative control over its documentation, has expressed frustration with copyright. And second, it is representative of a practiced eye for bodies in motion. Peter Moore, a London-born professional photographer, captured the images now available to us. Moore was widely known for documenting 1960s avant-garde performance in theater. One side of my current intervention into the discourse on Lick Piece is through archival study. The Archivsraum in Stuttgart, which we have heard of today in many significant ways, houses a wealth of information about Fluxus and also contains additional photographs. Unfortunately, I regret that they're not available at the time of my presentation. I do apologize, so just please entrust me with a schematic description of them for you. Multiple photographs within Archivsraum reveal a complex scene unfolding. In one image, Robert Watts, also Eisenhower's professor at Douglas College, is present, which is remarkable. His background of institutional authority, at the very least, bolsters a sense of male dominance. Across these images, if the indexical relationship between their bodies and hers provides any reliable evidence, Brecht and Watts, rather than Patterson, consumed more and engaged in greater deep contact with Eisenhower's body. In these photographs, Patterson hovered to the side and behind Eisenhower, where the whipped cream appears the least disturbed. While these few unshown images imperfectly recreate the moment, they do raise the question of Patterson's centrality as a participant compared to that of his peers. Additional images reveal that Eisenhower was not the only woman present. There were children involved in the space, but not the activity. So the diversity of ages and genders troubles its ostensibly sexual frame, unless this is a masochistic simulation forced upon women and children by men dressed in flip-flops, jeans, and t-shirts and suits. Lick Piece is a quizzical moment of adult play. Images within the archive present the downsides of adult play and misbehavior, which corroborates Patterson's memory of displeasure as well as his recognition of the performance's excess. As the cream curdles and thins, its liquefaction parallels Patterson's memory of disgust, recalling that he and others spit it out because it tasted awful. Their frivolous play with a consenting woman's body reveals how interactivity, a process in which individuals and objects directly influence judgment and action, provokes unanticipated outcomes such as repulsion. Tension between the object and subject relationship in Lick Piece warrant greater attention to reading the image and unpacking its historical context. Patterson is often isolated as an object of study in this work, which foregrounds more so a psychosocial conversation about race and propriety. In short, Act 2, Patterson and the female body. A significant portion of Lick Piece's historical currency is derived from the racial politics of Patterson, an African-American man, and Letty Eisenhower, a white Brooklyn-born woman. Fred Moten's study on the performance impacts contemporary discourse, which was part of a larger project to value Patterson's Blackness. Moten queries whether or not scholarship avails Patterson the agency afforded to other performance artists such as Carolee Schneemann, who came up today in conversation. What Patterson's Blackness manages to perform, in his estimation, is an ongoing claim to elusiveness and hypervisibility while instrumentalizing his own body. Patterson's racialized otherness spurs questions of sexual propriety, interracial sex endangered by scholars such as Francesca Royster, who raises the question about racial friction, such as, quote, hysteria around the Black rapist, along with the power and the force of the crowd that can turn on you at any time, the lynching, end quote. But I would also add the worldwide fetishization of Black men. And so here are just some of my study images from the Museum of Modern Art of photographs that I did not see when I was in the Zollmarschiv. So Royster also draws attention to, quote, context of potential violence, end quote, which, while they might not be recognizable in this present moment or even in the past, they may have also influenced Patterson's decisions with the work. He attempted to sever his ties with the fraught 1964 performance by shredding an oversized image and altering its presentation by turning Lick Piece into an operatic work called Tristan and Isolde. Variations of Lick Piece, Act 3. Variations of Lick Piece capture my attention because of how subsequent changes over time can inform historical gazes of Patterson and contemporary artists. For example, in the act of neatly shredding Peter Moore's photograph, Patterson visibly undermines the integrity of the image, its autonomy, and its capacity to be straightforward, which recalls how Fraser Ward unpacks the discursiveness of experience within performance and the centrality of documentation that inevitably establishes a virtual audience over time. In short, experience is tenuous, whether one is enmeshed within the live moment or experiencing figments of the work through print, hearsay, rumor, and digital screens. The firsthand account of Eisenhower, the figure and the object, offers one potent anecdote on the instability of experience. Her misrecognition of the performance's conceptual originator as Bob Watts and Patterson as his quote unquote assistant speaks to more than just the racial politics of displacement and subordination. It also addresses the reliability of vision and how to productively correlate action with intention and perception. Patterson's alterations to lick piece function to address this issue. And so I am just playing maybe the first 45 seconds of one of his performances, a version of lick piece that he calls Tristan and Isolde. Created in 1993, Patterson's Tristan and Isolde transformed lick piece into a decorous passion and placed nudity as intermedial between performance, theater, and opera. Tristan and Isolde, which extracts what the artist describes as the best parts or spirit of classical opera tradition, and lists new technology for old conventions. This includes filtering music by Wagner into the background, utilizing proscenia and stages, dramatizing the act that unfolds by Tristan and Isolde entering the stage for her to remove her clothing, while a Tristan places a concoction over her body as the audience is invited to consume. Isolde is typically visualized by a reclining rather than a sitting nude white woman, and Tristan appears as a gentleman whose suit suggests a false sense of mannered sophistication. This new version intensifies the reification of the nude female body by incorporating chopsticks to illustrate gustatory delight. However, the woman as object recedes in future performances that involve inanimate objects, such as inflatables of alligators, Edvard Munch's The Scream, as well as women partially clothed. Since the 1964 performance, lick piece / Tristan and Isolde has developed alongside Patterson's interest in spectacles, specifically those that intersect with Western views of progress, politics, and identity. By committing to a referential aesthetic in his performance and object-based works, Patterson, in his own words, is, quote, taking my revenge on all the old composers. For contemporary artists, the sexual and racial antics and politics of lick piece is resolved. For example, performance artist Clifford Owens, whose anthology we must credit for reinvigorating the ongoing study of Patterson today, upends the centrality of the white female nude by involving diverse bodies from different shapes and weights, bodies of Black men and women, those hairless and hairy. In so doing, Owens, whose own racialized performing body provokes conversations around interracial relations, him being African American, bypasses the desire for reproducing the so-called original form and context of Patterson's early work. Instead, a multiplicity of bodies highlights collective questions about safety, consumption, and the embodiment of objectification, beauty, revulsion, normative judgments, and cultural pressures. But for the sake of time today, I would like to end on Christine Stiles' apt observations on the sexualized structure of Fluxus performance in general, which was confronted by a double standard between so-called men's and women's art. Lick piece has been historically viewed as a degradation of flesh, as sexist, as the perfect accompaniment to Fluxus parties, dinners, an expression of male bravado. My contribution is to emphasize how its morphological changes compel another perspective, one that is contingent upon how the flesh of performing figures and the surface of inanimate objects are viewed. For example, Patterson can now observe his audience, their eagerness and trepidation, as well as the racialized backgrounds of those most willing to act out or misbehave. As I continue to research the multiple afterlives of this work, I'd like to end on just one question. How does the iterative nature of Patterson's performance complicate how behavior including misbehavior, is visualized and understood within overarching performance practices by him that are framed through games and concepts of play. Thank you.